welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar. So we're going to be talking about how to outsmart the big spenders. We've got a playbook for kind of running a winning campaign and a very exciting panel of seasoned campaigners, digital strategists who've all helped small teams win big. So my name is Sarah, and you may have guessed I am your host for today. So we're going to be running a Q&A style panel with two of NationBuilder's long-term partners, Ian Anderson from NationKit and Corey McCann from Code Nation, along with our very own Irene Pang Lee, who has lots of experience of digital campaigning on our platform at NationBuilder. So they're going to be sharing what's working for them right now in the elections we've seen in the last year, from voter outreach, volunteer management to fundraising, with real strategies that you're going to be able to take home to use yourself and to share amongst your team. So we're going to start today by kicking off with some introductions. Seeing as I have the mic, I can start us off by introducing myself very briefly. So I'm a senior business development rep on the team at NationBuilder. I've been here for just over 2 years now. So in this role, I get to work with an amazing range of organizations that are looking to come on board to the platform. And this role sends me to a range of events around Europe. So I get to spend a lot of time kind of with my ear to the ground, chatting to campaign managers from various countries and hearing about what works for them. And I'll hand over to you, Ian, from NationKit.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Really excited to be here. So I'm Ian and I run NationKit. We're a professional services firm that provides digital data and tech solutions for campaigns, corporate advocacy, and nonprofit groups. We work fairly globally, so we work across Canada, the US, some work in the UK, East Africa, and Australia. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And I'll hand over to you now, Corey.
Thank you very much. I'm Corey. I'm a director and software developer at Code Nation. We've been working on campaigns across the world for over a decade, like Ian as well, similar sort of space, creating websites and digital tools to help organizations and candidates achieve success. We also build and run a platform called Supporterbase that's aimed at empowering volunteers to run their own events, send email and SMS blasts, and manage peer-to-peer communications. And that tool allows volunteers to run their own actions and syncs all the data to your primary CRM like NationBuilder. So yeah, excited to join and learn from the other panelists and chime in a little about volunteer management.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, Irene from the team at NationBuilder.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Irene, and I'm a part of our account executive team here at NationBuilder, and I've been here for a little over 8 years and have had the privilege of working with organizations all across the globe in almost all of our markets in the US here and internationally. And really excited to jump in and share a little bit about kind of the types of things that I've seen work for campaigns and different organizations, and just really good to be here and with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. So now you'll have just a bit of a lay of the land from our panelists, and we're going to kickstart our panel segments. So we're going to start with Ian at NationKit. So recently, in today's context, we've heard a lot about how fundraising feels a lot harder right now. So the first question that we want to kickstart today with is, what would you say one way a campaign can keep donation asks feeling personal, even when resources are tight?
Thanks, Sarah. So it might not be one way, but it's important for us to distinguish on when we're reaching out to donors is what type of donor we're reaching out to. So typically campaigns, we think about our donors in two large blocks. We have our large scale donors and our small scale, and we engage with them differently. So each campaign, where that line is, what constitutes a large or a small donor, that'll differ a little bit. But typically your large donors, you're thinking of, they're going to come in, and depending on your jurisdiction, they're going to max out their contribution that they can make to the campaign. These sort of people, you end up having more individual conversations or small group chats. So you can think of it sort of like coffee parties or living room chats. And this is usually some sort of engagement that is done by either the candidate directly or your campaign manager or someone senior in your group. And there's a lot of time and attention put to it, as typically these are going to be multiple thousands of dollars that this individual or this group of individuals are going to contribute to you. So I can kind of go into a bit more detail there, but that's one that's one contingent, and that's a lot more of a high touch. When it comes to your smaller donors, so these are people you think would come through the website. They're going to be giving you 5, 20, sort of the smaller donation numbers like that. A lot of the times when you're thinking about the way you're going to communicate with them, a lot of time this is going to be email to your email list you've already been building through your different field activities, your different engagement methods. And these people, the way that I always like to think about engaging with them when we're sending out, say, like a donation ask is, how do we make it relevant to that individual or to that group of people we're looking to target? And the relevancy can come in terms of if it's topical, is it something that's regionally specific to them? And there is a piece of urgency to it. So you'll see this a lot with donations or donation asks where there's a fundraising deadline or the campaign is trying to make a purchase of some kind, and there's these different pieces to try and entice people to act now versus saying we just need your money. So tying some sort of urgency to it, you end up seeing a lot more success with your email and phone engagements.
Thank you. And you mentioned kind of regional distinctions there. So I just wanted to follow up and ask, how can someone start if they don't have much kind of donor history to actually segment from?
Yeah, so when you're starting off on a campaign, and it depends on your jurisdiction, you might have some existing data you can bring in. A lot of the different regions we operate in, through the different laws, you don't have, say, contact information for your list of electors. So there's always a bit of like, you start off and you're either doing some advertising or you're just hitting the ground, getting people into the system sort of one at a time. And when you start sending asks out, you're not going to start really target too much at the start. But when you start growing a bit, and again, this depends on the level of campaign. If you're running, say, like a municipal level campaign versus something at a sort of state level, or that is, you can start looking at, based off of where these people have come in from and what information you have, whether it's their address information you've collected as part of how they've signed up or come into your system, or other ways they've come in. Maybe you've asked them an entry question like, what's the most important issue to you? Something like that. Anything that gives you a little bit of sort of like a hook that then you can create an email series. Most of this I'm talking about is in the context of email, but you could create an email series that goes, hey, basically the candidate spoke about this issue recently, sort of like, here's the video to it. We need your help, to make this a reality, sort of, call to action, away you go. So it doesn't have to be too tricky in terms of you need to have a bunch of personalization inside of every message. It's normally the ones for a hook that gets them to actually open and read the email. And then you can look at translating that into a donation. But once they've opened the email, that also gives you information, if you're using the emails tool in NationBuilder, as you can then retarget people based off of the email interactions they have.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I think those are some really important strategies that, as you say, can be the difference between an additional donation versus drop off. You need to get someone to open that initial email. And coming on to you, Corey, next, we've just heard about kind of keeping asks personal on type resources. And we know that volunteers are a really vital resource that can make or break a campaign, but not everyone knows how to use them strategically. So I want to ask you what you would say some ways are to, or some ways you've seen teams turn volunteers into powerful leaders.
Thanks, Sarah. We found a key point here is to ensure a strong strategic division of responsibilities between you as the campaign HQ and your supporters, who will become your community of volunteers and leaders. And under that model, the campaign HQ sets the objectives as well as the overarching strategy and the direction for the campaign. And you provide the systems and the tools your volunteers need to be effective, and also critically the support and coordination necessary. But you also, you can only achieve scale when your volunteer leaders are also empowered to execute locally. And that means running their own events and having those visible online, engaging with supporters in person and continuing those conversations as part of peer-to-peer communications. where they're focused on keeping in touch with locals in their area. And so kind of digging in a little, when you as the campaign leadership set the overall direction, you're determining the level of ambition, you're setting standards, you're setting expectations, you're defining the key message guidelines, and you're deciding on what activities you want your volunteers to focus on based on your own theory of change and understanding what's going to really move the needle with voters in your electorate. And you also play a lead role in setting up the right systems and processes. Volunteers are going to need access to campaigning tools focused on just their local area, or potentially the tactics that they're contributing to and coordinating. And you can also set up approval flows for those, ensuring that volunteers know who to seek approval from, where and how to do it, and which actions do and don't need approvals. The campaign can also lead in providing all the training and materials around that tool set. So those are things like volunteer inductions, call scripts, other communication templates or FAQs, as well as ongoing trainings and guides on all sorts of topics, how to write effective emails or running successful events, and doing the follow-up based off of that, marking attendance and the data, key data storage mechanisms after events have been run. And so obviously technology systems are a really critical part of that infrastructure that you and your campaign team will need to set up so that volunteers can have that access to all the up-to-date support or information for the people in their area, and easy tools to keep in touch, sending communications, managing and running their own events. And you as the campaign team are going to need tools to be able to monitor that activity and approve all the key actions and manage all that data between your systems. And obviously we're presenting here with NationBuilder, and their systems are a really powerful way to provide that overall insight and all the kind of recruitment and broadcast comms and management at the electoral total campaign level. And I am talking here based on like representing supporter base, and we provide some of those tools for volunteers to run their own events and do their communications. But they're just two options to provide these sorts of tools. The key is, and there's obviously others available, the key is to find the tools that suit your overall goals and also provide your volunteers with everything they need locally. So once that's all in place, once you've got your systems and architecture ready, the real magic happens, because volunteers can start to lead on execution, and they'll be empowered to run their own events, recruit friends and other participants from the local community, follow up with RSVPs and attendees. And they should also have the flexibility to tailor things to their personal relationships within the community and their understanding of local factors, whether that's demographics or group dynamics, geography, all the other points that can vary wildly between areas. And the challenge is therefore to kind of maintain the right balance between your overall strategy that you're coordinating centrally and the execution that's distributed among your volunteer leaders and it's happening on the ground in their local areas. So obviously, if you tried to do everything centrally, you'd run into bottlenecks, your staff would run out of time and capacity, and the operation would be impossible to scale. And if the opposite were true and the execution was entirely decentralized without that sort of overarching structure or direction, it would obviously become chaotic, and volunteer leaders could end up acting inconsistently, not knowing who the right point person is from the campaign to get guidance at key moments. And that could lead to all sorts of reputational risks. So there's a balance there that's a challenge to strike, but with the right planning, it can be achieved. And campaigns are always most effective and scalable when they provide that strategy and the systems and support, but then their volunteers are trusted and equipped to lead that local execution. And over time, as volunteer leaders grow in their experience and engagement, they can even begin to co-create strategy alongside the campaign leadership. So it's an exciting challenge, but if you can work that balance in your favour, then it can lead to really impressive results where volunteers and supporter-run events can become a secret weapon and really power your campaign.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I love that point on kind of giving volunteers what they need to co-create strategy and kind of given their own input even more to grow a campaign and, bring their friends and snowball their impact. So thank you for that. Handing on to you next, Irene. We've just kind of heard Corey touch on the importance of empowering volunteers at a local level, and this point on local over mass feels really important to this conversation. So I want to ask you, from what you've seen working on small and mid-sized campaigns with NationBuilder, we know that kind of bigger campaigns are sometimes able to rely on volume, blasting, huge lists with more generic messaging maybe. So for a smaller budget conscious campaign, what would you say is a smart tactic to ensure that your digital outreach actually gets delivered and drives real engagement. So you're actually being able to make the most of your digital presence that you've got.
Yeah, totally. The thing that I've seen is like a common denominator and a good foundation that a lot of successful campaigns have run, like on all scales, but particularly for those that aren't coming with a ton of data or a ton of, list of supporters, is really just being able to obtain and maintain their data in a really organized fashion and keep it all in one place. And I think generally like having a good foundation of like understanding what data points you want to be able to collect about your supporters and really focusing in on like exactly the types of information you want to collect about your voters and supporters is really critical, and not just going out there and try to obtain, it's really tempting to go there and try to obtain old lists or purchase lists. But a lot of times that data ends up being really inaccurate or just really outdated. And over time, if you're utilizing data that isn't accurate, that isn't relevant and up to date to how you want to strategize your outreach, it can really, do a lot of harm in the outreach that you're actually sending. So key point is just like really keeping your data organized in one place and making sure you're intentional about the information you're collecting about your folks as it relates to your outreach strategy. And then the secondary piece to that is making sure that all of this clean and accurate data that you're slowly collecting over time through the campaign and through volunteers is actually utilized in the right way, and that the emails and the outreach that you're sending is actually landing in people's inboxes. So shifting to kind of having a focus around email deliverability is something that I think is really key for campaigns to focus on. Nowadays for campaigns, it's like email is still the main method of, most scalable and affordable way to reach voters, volunteers, and donors. But a lot of times, if you're not focusing on the way that you're sending your emails, your email deliverability, and your email reputation, all of the efforts that you have in composing the perfect email and finding the right audience can all fall flat if it's really not landing. And so, email deliverability just in general is kind of thinking about it as like your email reputation. If you have really good engagement, have really good, email statistics like open rates, and you're not sending to bad emails, you're not sending to old emails or people that are marking you as spam, your reputation and, your overall email deliverability will increase, and email providers are likely to flag you as more of a trusted sender versus if you're just email blasting like a whole entire list and a ton of people are marking you as spam or they're bad emails and you're just using outdated kind of information, then your emails can be quickly flagged as spam and like blocked entirely. So it's really important that you're like utilizing the strategies of really being able to keep your engagement really high, segmenting your list and making sure you're targeting the right folks for the right type of reasons and asking the right things of your folks. And so, overall, I think like it's proven time and again, like sending to an engaged email list is there's so much there's so much potential for you to actually reach folks, and they have a tendency to donate more, they have a tendency to volunteer more, and they're just a lot more generally responsive to the asset you're going to be making. So making sure that you're keeping really, really good information and accurate information and sending to the right relevant folks is like really important so that your emails actually do get delivered.
Thank you. Yeah, I think data hygiene is something that can be really overlooked, but you're right in that, deliverability is a gateway to growth in a campaign if you can actually be heard. So I just want to follow up there and just ask for like one key practical tip that you would say to maintain that good deliverability from what you've shared.
Yeah, there's a lot of different key factors I think that impact overall deliverability. I think, there's lots of factors like email, subject line, frequency, like how often you're sending. So there's a lot of different things, and definitely highly recommend you all look into all of the things that impact your email deliverability and just help to improve it over time. But I think a couple of key things I would say is, first of all, you got to make sure that, you have the consent of your, the folks that you're emailing. So you want to make sure that the people that you're emailing are actually consented to receive information, because that's the quickest way for somebody to mark you as spam or unsubscribe. And overall, over time, those sorts of results will like negatively affect your reputation. And then I would say the second piece is really personalized. So making sure that the content that you're sending is personalized to the people that are receiving it. So segmenting your audience and making sure that the email content that they're receiving receiving is highly relevant, because not only are they more likely to open it, but over time, those sorts of results will continue to get much more positive results from them actually wanting to respond to the call to action and opening the emails and looking at you as a candidate or a campaign as somebody that they trust. So I would say those are a couple of the key things.
Thank you. So we've spoken so far, particularly leading on from what you've just shared, Irene, about implementing good data practices, email deliverability, and segmentation. And so leading on from this, along with your last point, Corey, about kind of empowering volunteers to actually be able to lead, which I know is something key to your work at Code Nation, and what you mentioned about supporter base, I want to focus on supporter journeys. So how would you say, how would you keep people engaged after they donate, volunteer, or attend event? You know, they've taken the action, but how do you engage them after that?
Thanks, Sarah. We found this kind of three main pivotal points in recent Australian elections that have helped drive this like effective supporter journeys over time. One of them has been to centre the campaign on community building, and it's worked in dozens of electorates in recent elections where community independents have emerged as a true third force in national politics, and they've been able to win seats from the major parties consistently over the last couple of elections. It first emerged, that movement, in an electorate called Indi in 2013, when a bunch of locals came together because they weren't being heard by the member representing them in Parliament. They started holding kitchen table conversations, informal surveys, started canvassing local views on important issues. And initially it was the goal of it was to hold the local member to account. But when that didn't work, they ultimately formed a community campaign and nominated a candidate and managed to unseat the MP from the major party who held that seat. So Cathy McGowan won it in 2013, and it's still held by an independent now who's effectively a successor who remains the member for Indi. And still to this day, it's the backbone of the movement is genuine community listening and engagement. And it's powered by volunteers who are starting to turn out in huge numbers and really re-energising local participation in politics. It's that sense of commitment to a longer term community objective rather than just a shorter term single cycle election 5-week campaign. It's been replicated successfully across the country now. And that community first ethos really does help keep people engaged, not just after a single event or donation, but over the long haul. And we saw it as well. There's one great example of this at this most recent election that happened just 25 days ago on my birthday. Nicolette Boulay, who first made this seat of Bradfield marginal 3 years ago at the last election, announced she'd continue all her community surveys, her outreach and her consultation, kind of operating as a shadow member for the seat. It was sort of her way of saying that she'd be a spokesperson for the people, for that community-driven way of doing politics. And so she's been active in the community for the last 3 years. Her volunteers have been out in force during that whole time. And at the 2025 election, we still don't have a result kind of going on now 3.5, 4 weeks after the election. The latest margin I saw was 8 votes, but she's quite possibly going to become the actual official member for Bradfield. And it's off the back of that 3 years of work and that long-term engagement with volunteers. And yeah, there'll be a full manual recount, so we might not know that result for quite some time yet. But so that's the first point, trying to really engage with the community and have center your campaign on community building. And the second is to let volunteers shape their journey and empower them to take on greater responsibility, ideally responsibilities that match their interests and their experience. So I talked a little earlier about how critical it is to make sure your volunteers are trusted and equipped to lead that local execution. And the reality is that in a flourishing community of volunteers, there's always a few who are going to step up and eventually become a part of the core campaign team. So you'll have like different groups of supporters, and some of them will be passionate locals who can only chip in a few hours when they can. But you'll also find people with really niche skills and expertise in areas that can be incredibly valuable to your campaign. And you should ensure your systems are able to empower those people to scale up their involvement and to identify them to take on bigger roles over time. And letting those volunteers really shape their journey and giving them the tools to drive action and kind of help self-identify is critical to keeping them engaged longer term also. And the final point is just to keep the engagement human and social. Sort of coming back to that point about you don't want your volunteers to feel like they're part of some transactional activism they put on a shirt for the last 5 weeks of a campaign just at election time. You want them to feel like they're part of an ongoing community. And one way of doing that is to really help keep that engagement human and have, you know, trivia nights and community events, casual get-togethers alongside all the activism and other campaigning events that you're doing, if you're going to try and build a sort of powerful movement long-term and stay in power through various election cycles and all the whims of politics. And that's also really powerful to build kind of results beyond the immediate electoral or advocacy outcome in the short term, but to drive a community that's able to lead change on your cause. So yeah, those are the 3 points that we've seen really help shape supporter journeys over time.
Thank you, Corey. That's definitely an interesting example. And I think you mentioned that the candidate was being shy of 8 votes or so, if I heard you correctly. Yeah, so that, I feel like that just shines a light on kind of the need to engage and nurture each individual relationship and not overlook it and be human, as you say. So yeah, thank you for that. Circling back to you now, Ian, when it comes to targeting, whether for fundraising or outreach, what would you say, what's one mistake you see campaigns make and how can they actually fix it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in a lot of cases when you're looking at targeting, it's starting with what are your base assumptions. In a lot of cases, campaigns or groups end up, you have to start somewhere. So you start with a baseline set of, values, belief system or assumptions that the candidate has, and say like that core contingent around you, kind of creates that as like the starting place for your campaign or your advocacy group. In the campaigning context, going from that is looking at how do you translate that into, say, a platform or into things that connect with enough of the electorate to then win. So we had this interesting election in the Alberta provincial elections where there was a baseline set of assumptions that the opposition, they're the opposition now, but the NDP party had, where they provided all these different local campaigns with, here are the people that look like NDP. So here's here's your priority people that you should go canvass. Here are your priority people that you should reach out to in your jurisdiction. And it makes, in a high level aggregate, that can do you a fair bit of good where you're targeting areas that are likely to have more support than others, but there's always regional differences. So a good example of this is one of the candidates that we were working with directly. Their jurisdiction was just outside of the inner city in Calgary. It was a wealthier neighborhood, and the messaging from the party that they wanted everyone to focus on and the people they wanted to reach out to was an affordability case or argument, which resonates well with a huge portion of the population, kind of everywhere. But in this context, the assumption was made that it would hold true there. But if you look at the demographic breakdowns you had for this region, we ended up doing a little bit of like a small level of polling in that local area. We found that healthcare was by and large the top issue for people, and it connected with people that didn't match the typical profile of an Alberta NDP voter. And so the campaign, we switched from targeting what the party was saying, like these are your priority people, to targeting these people that cared more, or like their top issue was healthcare. And we found more success in terms of at the door of getting people to sign up to join the campaign, to volunteer at the door, take lawn signs, versus when we sent out groups to just hit the party's priority 1 doors to hit. So it's kind of, on the smaller scale campaigns that might not be as applicable if you don't have a party infrastructure, but it shows like it can be a good starting place, but you need to have a way to check your assumptions, and you get that feedback cycle through your canvassing actions, through your calling, through events you have. So you always have to start somewhere and make an assumption, but you need to be open to either adjusting that or to really making sure that you're getting a broad amount of feedback from the electorate on what, in that point in time, what truly matters to them, so that your campaign will resonate.
And kind of talking about, checking your assumptions, and just kind of looking at the information you have, would you say, I guess my question is how targeted is too targeted with your kind of messaging from the information you gather?
Yeah, So this is now ancient history, but if we think back to Cambridge Analytica, basically back when micro-targeting was sort of the new thing where you could subset to an extreme degree with digital advertising and hit a very small populace and get them the information that resonated the most with them. Very effective at getting that core contingent or that small group of people engaged. But there's sort of two pieces to this. There's the perception piece of your targeting, and then there's the effort of creating the targeting. So the perception side is the belief that I hold and I've seen work out well is that any messaging you put out, no matter how targeted it is, should be able to live in conjunction with all of your other messaging. So campaigns got themselves into trouble where you could micro-target, say, some voters in California, and you could talk about specific environmental policies, and that the campaign was going to support them, where at the same time, that same campaign was targeting some voters in West Virginia, which said the complete opposite about supporting more or reopening some coal mines. So that's something where I always think about it is if you sent all of your messaging to sort of the same family and they sat down at the kitchen table and discussed it, is there going to be sort of a is there going to be a conflict there? Like, so you can't kind of completely change your messaging because then it's disingenuous, breaks trust, etc. It's more, how can you repackage or reframe the core pillar or points of your campaign in a way that the hook matters more for that group you're targeting, whether it's an environmental angle to something, whether it's an economic or development or like jobs angle. So that's the way that I think about the micro-targeting message. And then the other side of that is effort of, you can kind of keep slicing and dicing your data. And depending on the campaign and the scale, I don't typically go too much deeper, at least recently, than either it's an issue-based targeting or a geography-based targeting, and it's rare that I'll mix and go further, like do like this region, and then I further break that region down into issues. A lot of time I kind of choose one way that I break down my targeting, and I go with that, and I find after that you kind of hit almost like a marginal utility. You get a diminishing value of returns after that. At least that's what I've seen in recent Canadian, American, and Australian elections.
Yeah, so you can really be local, but to the extent that it still fits under your core campaign message, just as you say, switching up the framing and maybe the focus. So, if a group of friends that meet up from different areas, they should be able to fit those puzzle pieces together. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, it just shatters trust, and once you've done that, you're done.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, with just about 7-8 minutes left, to round up today's panel, I'm going to give each of you just a minute to leave our audience with some concluding pieces of advice for campaigns. So, Corey, starting with you, our question is, what's one tactic that you'd recommend to any leader trying to do more with less right now?
We would recommend rostering and shift management as something to look into. Trying to sort of break down all your events and actions and tactics into time-based or role-based shifts. And, like depending on your campaign, you might end up sort of recruiting hundreds or perhaps even thousands of volunteer hours from your supporter community. And then the next challenge is to try and get the most out of those hours and to try and give people the best possible experience. And often those things go hand in hand. And we find rostering and shift management really helps avoid volunteer fatigue and maximize efficiency. You've seen sort of like volunteer oversubscription for certain activities at times, having 20 people rock up for a letterboxing event. It just leads to wasted time and engagement drop off. People don't have the best time if they don't feel like they're having an impact. We find shift tools allow you to kind of cap the numbers, allocate volunteers by need, and funnel people towards the activities that matter most. And also, like as part of that kind of progress bars and visual prioritization, lets volunteers actually self-direct effectively, so they can decide what they're going to be best suited to and where they're going to be able to have the biggest impact based on how many people are already signed up to the various events that are up there. So yeah, that's kind of one big shout out we'd give.
Thank you. And on to you, Irene. You spoke to like lots of important points today on data hygiene and deliverability. So what would you say your one tactic is for a leader trying to do more with less?
Yeah, I think the key point over just everything that I've discussed around data hygiene and email deliverability is just like keeping in mind that quality over quantity is really, really important to just generally consider, both as it relates to the data that you have, but also in your outreach strategy, right? So I always say that a smaller, more engaged list is a lot more effective and powerful than a very large inactive list. And so just keeping that in mind, it's tempting to want to take a large list and just start blasting it or do whatever it, you think could be impactful. But I think focusing in on the folks that, want to really listen to what you have to say, and focusing in on kind of making sure that your outreach is targeted and segmented to the folks and making sure that the content you're sending them is really relevant. So just quality over quantity, I think, can go so much farther, especially if you don't have as many resources, to just focus on that and collecting the right information and sending the right outreach.
Yeah, that's punchy and sound. I like that. Quality over quantity. The power of one person snowballing into many is way more important than hundreds that do nothing, definitely. And finally, on to you, Ian. What's the tested tactic you'd recommend to a leader looking to do more with less?
Yeah, kind of tying off of Corey and Irene's points is for campaigns, it's really about doing the basics well. And while not all campaigns that do the basics well will win, all campaigns that win do the basics well. And those are things like, to Corey's points, the volunteer onboarding process that needs to be smooth. You don't want people to drop off, and you see this all the time. You have a volunteer form on the website for a campaign, you fill it out, the campaign never gets back to you. You don't get engaged. That just ends up being wasted effort. And in a lot of cases, that turns that volunteer off from engaging with you or supporting you. Similarly, with donor calls for follow-ups, somebody donates, they should get some sort of message from the campaign, thanking them for that. And you can use that as a follow-up opportunity. And then, like, back to Irene's point, is your data hygiene, ensuring the data that you do have is good and useful data. There's a lot of different services where you can purchase lists from, again, depending on your jurisdiction. And while that can be helpful for giving you some context when you're going out and doing field activities, it's nowhere near as valuable as having a smaller list of people that have taken that explicit action to join your campaign or movement.
Definitely. Thank you. It looks like we have a couple of minutes to go through a few questions. So let me just see what we've got in the Q&A box. And we've got time, I think, to just answer about one. So we've got, how can digital tools help scale volunteer leadership development across regions or constituencies? Does anyone in particular want to have a stab at that one?
I can give a quick example of that, and then maybe I'll let any of the other panelists jump in.
Yeah, sure.
So we used recently it was on NationBuilder with the event system, where I believe Corey was speaking about community events or volunteer-led events, where we created a system for the campaign where a volunteer could create an event or post an event on the official campaign website without needing any, well, with very little touch from an actual person on the campaign. So a volunteer could come, look at that sort of event resources. I want to host a local coffee party or meetup in this place. That would go in, they submit the form. There's a quick review process for the campaign just to make sure that it's a legitimate thing. And the campaign team hits create, and that was the extent that the campaign team had to interact with that. And then that volunteer took care of the actual hosting, everything like that. And you can do that in a way where you allow the volunteers or your local people to host on the platform, where you still get all of that data. So you still get all the RSVP information, the attendee information, but you don't have to plan everything. You just provide some resources. And that's a way that you can kind of exponentially scale your campaign without needing a ton of people like on staff.
Thank you, Ian. And there is one more question actually that we're close to time, but I think it's really important to answer. So we've got, what kinds of voter data is most valuable to collect, especially for smaller teams, to be able to make voters feel connected to our campaign?
I can jump into this one. I think Ian talked about this a little bit as well, but yeah, I mentioned about the data collecting, so I'm glad this question came up, but it's really important that you are intentional about the information that you're collecting, whether it's in person or digitally, like online or online forms. But anything, I think the key there is like feeling connected to your campaign. You want to make sure that you're capturing information about the interests of your voters and what things that they actually really do care about so that you can then in return send them content that brings them, like, has them interested in what you have to say. And so you can't really do that. You can't send them messages that they care about unless you know what they care about. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can, in person, if you do, or if you're doing field operations and collecting survey information or survey data about like what your voters care about, that information is really critically important so that you can start to tag them within a system of like what issues they care about, what are things that they want to hear from you about, so that you can do the segmenting. If you don't have this data, you can't segment your outreach, at least issue wise. And so being able to say like what things and issues do you care about, what do you want to hear from me as your candidate or from the campaign. You can have forms on your website, or if you're doing this in person, collect that data and make sure that you're inputting it into a database like NationBuilder so that you can start to be able to connect with your folks by sending them the right and relevant information and outreach.
Definitely. Yeah, that's definitely a good use for surveys. I think they can be underestimated in their power just to collect simple, different things to focus on within your communications. That is just about all we have time for today. And I think in summary, we can really say that to outsmart the big spenders, campaigns should be built on trust, community, and clear supporter pathways. So there's a lot more that was obviously discussed today. If you want to learn more about NationBuilder, NationKit, and Code Nation, and we'd love to stay in touch and chat to you one-on-one if you have anything specific to cover. So thanks again for all of your time, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you all.